Yeah, it was one of those games where we've seen across the country starting Thursday night in the NFL where, okay, the game's either suspended while it's being played. We saw that in the upstate yesterday. We saw it in the NFL. I think there was another game, the game in Charlotte today. NFL game got postponed a little bit.
Yeah.
I I can't speak to having to sit through a rain delay. I never played a sport outdoors when I was old enough to really not just be limber. But when you hear Chris Collinsworth talk about, you hear the announcers talk about it, and I think, even Shane, if he didn't say in the press conference last night, he might have hinted at it. Yeah, when you're ready to go for 7 o'clock and then you wait. I wasn't surprised to see a slow start, but we'll talk all about that. Alex, I do want to quickly hit the bullet points here. South Carolina did win the game 38-10. They did not cover the spread. I think the spread ended up being around 40 something
42
at kickoff, 42 at kickoff. But when you look at first downs, South Carolina had 16, South Carolina State 13. The third down efficiency, South Carolina State was 6 of 16, which isn't a terrible number at all, but South Carolina 3 of 12. South Carolina went forward twice on fourth down, got both, but to be out yardaged, however you say it. South Carolina State had 270 total yards, and Gamecocks had 253 yards per pass attempt. South Carolina State 7.4, South Carolina 6.4. Rushing, the Gamecock defense stood up. Only 62 rushing yards for South Carolina State, 125 for the Gamecocks. But Gamecocks only averaging 3.5 yards per rush. Penalties again, Alex, 7 penalties for 48 yards. Fumbles lost, interceptions thrown. Gamecocks did win the turnover battle. But South Carolina State possessed this ball almost 35 minutes during this ball game. And then, just looking over some general stats, LaNorris Sellers, 11 for 19, 128 yards and a touchdown. Definitely, there were some drops. There were some times when he just didn't have time to throw, quite frankly. Jerron Howell, we like that he got 7 carries against South Carolina State. I'm sure it's a feel-good moment for him. But outside of defense and special teams, I don't think there's a lot to write home for the offense, Alex. Here we are, and as crazy it is to say, the Gamecocks have already completed 2 games on their schedule. We all know there's only 12 in a regular season. Time flies, right?
Yeah, I feel like we were just talking about the second scrimmage of preseason camp already. Yeah, time flies, especially once you get into that season and kind of get into the role of a game week and all that. Like, before we know it, we'll be here on Wednesday night on Late Night Gamecock Show getting ready for Vanderbilt. That's going to be a really interesting game that, obviously we'll talk more about that down the road, but it'll be here before we know it.
Yeah, I think at this point, Alex, might as well just take overall stock and inventory on the Gamecock football team. You have a game, a neutral site in Atlanta against Virginia Tech. I think most Gamecock fans felt at least okay leaving that game. You escape it, you cover, you're 1-0, and you got South Carolina State coming to town. And the old coaching adage, Alex, is that you're never going to get better in the season from game 1 to game 2, right? And that's where you're going to get better. That's your biggest leap, I should say. So, to my eyes, Alex, I didn't see the Gamecocks get better from week 1 to week 2.
Yeah, I think obviously, all the talk, after the game and into today has been about the offense, and just a lot did not go right. Now I think it all kind of starts, with all the talk has been starting up front. Like they didn't just, they get a bad field position to start with on like their first 3 drives, starting within like the 15-yard line. And then just could not get a push in their run game up front. There were really no room to run. And then it just kind of felt like they, hurt themselves with some, self-inflicted penalties. And, that was a lot of kind of what you mentioned off the top with the number of penalties they had. Like, maybe that had to do with, the rain delay and all that. But there was a lot of pre-snap stuff that they got to get cleaned up. And, not only from an offensive standpoint, but then you had some special team stuff where it was illegal formations. And then just the false starts or a few of those early on, they got to get that kind of stuff cleaned up because a team like Vandy will come in and they'll take, advantage of that. But just wasn't a whole lot of room to run. I think you got yourselves into really obvious passing situations. And even against a team like South Carolina State that they can make you, pay for that. And just early on just was not a whole lot of time either for LaNorris Sellers to throw. So, it's going to be interesting to see how everything kind of, forms out this week. Obviously, we'll talk about some injuries on the other side of the ball too that happened in that game and kind of going into that game. But that's going to be kind of the talk of this week heading into Vanderbilt.
Yeah, Alex, when I look at LaNorris Sellers, and I hear it, I hear the criticism. You don't have to go far to hear it. And for me, I just can't say after 38 pass attempts that I know what this offense is. I can't say I know what LaNorris Sellers can be because how many drops can you count off just off the top of your head? I mean, I can think of at least 2 or 3 in Virginia Tech. I'm sure there was 1 or 2 yesterday. Well, yeah, the one where he kind of Patrick Mahomes and kind of flipped it or tried to flip it to Nick Harbor, who was kind of standing out of bounds saying, what the heck? That would have been a first down, another completion. Instead, some incomplete. So right now, Sellers is 23 of 38 with 337 passing yards, a shade over 150, 160 a game, and a 60% completion rate. But Alex, I feel like if you let LaNorris set his feet and get his shoulder into it, get his legs into the ball, he's fairly accurate. But all those passes that you see sail high, that's all footwork. That's all he can't get set because he's under duress.
That's what I was going to get to. It kind of felt like when you watched them last night a little bit, kind of early on, especially because they a little bit in kind of early on that second half figured some things out just from driving the ball down the field. But you kind of felt like he felt that pressure early on in that game where some of those throws like that one to Nick Harbor, that was a little bit later in the game, but kind of sailed that one a little bit on Nick Harbor. But I think, just a little bit of feeling the pressure there. And, I think when you looked at, what South Carolina State was doing defensively, they were kind of doing the same thing Virginia Tech. They were just kind of selling out to stop the run. And, some of the things you saw in the Virginia Tech game that South Carolina did was that little tight end dump off pass that worked so many different times. And I think what that does is really stretch the defense out. And, I think, I'm interested to see just from a run game standpoint how that kind of, gets into Vanderbilt because I didn't see it felt like too many outside run opportunities in that game. It felt like a lot of it was kind of diving towards the middle. And then I think, I'm interested to see if they get LaNorris more involved in the run game. Because I think, when you get him involved in the run game, that really opens up. I think it helps them, kind of get into the flow of the game as well. But then also, I think it kind of opens up the defense because, I think last night there were a few times South Carolina State was just waiting on the opportunities for him to run and sat on it. And, but I'm just from a run game standpoint, that's what I'm looking for this week is obviously, from a, up front getting a push, but then also how can they get LaNorris Sellers more in that because obviously we've seen from the end of last year to what he even did in the Virginia Tech game, that's the huge strength of his game.
Yeah, and we're going to keep talking about it. With LaNorris, he's taken 6 sacks, and I don't know how many of them I would say he's taken. I feel like he's been dragged down. But he has 21 carries on the year for 48 yards and a touchdown. But then he's been sacked 6 times for negative 41 yards. So you take those sacks out of it, and LaNorris could very well be averaging 60, 70 yards rushing a game. But LaNorris is at his best when he's being creative. He's not at his best when he's sitting in the pocket. I'm not saying that it means he can't do it. We've seen him plenty of times stick in the pocket and plant his foot and get his shoulder into it and make excellent passes. But when it seems like it's a bull rush every second or third play, any quarterback in the world is going to be kind of looking down before they're looking up and scanning the field. And I think that obviously the Gamecocks have not attacked the middle of the field outside of deep, long passes. But those deep, long passes are the times when LaNorris has time in the pocket. And guess what? Nick's pretty fast, but it takes him a couple seconds to get down there.
Yeah, that's something that, I probably would have liked to see a little bit more yesterday was just those kind of, I'm not going to sit here and say that they're RPOs because those are so hard to tell, but there's little quick slants in the middle that you saw on Nick Harbor and Donovan Murphy run against Virginia Tech. Like, I think that really helps kind of back the linebackers off a little bit. And, I don't think you saw a whole lot of that last night. It just kind of felt like they're, just trying to see what they can do, trying to really force that run game early on. I think, I think ESPN's Jordan Reed kind of posted the video of that first play of the game. There was a wide open receiver right in the middle of the field, and Lawrence just missed him on that one. So, I think there's opportunities, but I think it's just more about getting him back in rhythm. And I think, you saw it in that Virginia Tech game. They kind of got him in their rhythm with some of those early passes, that tight end dump off pass or the slant to Nick Harbor. I think you just want to see that a little bit more to help get him in rhythm. That once he's in rhythm, it feels like that's when he really kind of gets going, just like most quarterbacks.
Yeah, and for LaNorris especially, it seems like when he gets hit a couple times and he makes some throws on the run, he really turns into almost like Morpheus in the Matrix. I mean, it looks like time is moving slow for him. Yeah, I don't know what it is with not letting him use his legs. I don't think they're trying to make him think too much, and it sounds like a complete cop out. But this offense has been very vanilla. It hasn't necessarily been anything to razzle dazzle you. I mean, a lot of straight draw, straight zone, nothing to make the defense think.
Yeah, it felt more vanilla last night, just from a overall offensive game plan thing. Like just they had kind of some little things in there, like the little pitch, the Jared Brown that probably would have worked, but there was a little bit of just didn't work. And fortunately for South Carolina, that ball bounced right back to Jared Brown because that would have been that would have been a horrible turnover there. But there's a little bit of that, but I think you just want to see more of that, just because it just feels like when you're watching the game, that you can see this from TV too, that it just feels like the defense is sitting in that middle of that offense right now and waiting for the runs up the middle. And I think I keep saying it, but that tight end dump off pass works so well against Virginia Tech just because it put those linebackers in a bind. And I'm interested to see if this week going against Vandy, who's got a good defense and returns everybody from last year, if they bring that out a little bit more and maybe try to air it out with some of those deep passes if they can get the time to do so.
Yeah, I quickly want to go back to something you just mentioned, Alex, and I'm not picking on you or anybody when I say this, but that Jordan Reed video, I watched it, and yeah, it was first play of the game, had a potential for a touchdown, maybe a 95-yard pass, at least a big gain. But I've seen a lot of Gamecock fans, especially on our message board, be very critical of LaNorris for not being able to make that read. Yeah, he should have made that play 100%. But I can show the film of the top 5 quarterbacks for this year's NFL draft, and I can find the same play every single game. They're not perfect.
Yeah, I'm not saying that was an easy throw by any. I mean, because that's an NFL type of throw he would have had to make.
Yeah, that wasn't a gotcha. That was just more of a you can find flaws, but I think that overall LaNorris, when he's had opportunity to be calm, cool, and collective in the pocket, almost every single pass is right on.
Let's talk about it. Let's scream and shout it. Let's fire